Welcome to the Beyond Pain podcast with your host, Joe Gambino and Joe LaVacca. Join the two Joes, two physical therapists, as they discuss how to navigate the uncertainties of pain so you can move beyond it and get back to the activities you love most. This podcast is for Joe, and their guests to share their clinical thoughts and ideas based on their collective clinical experiences. Can this information be for you? Maybe, but we cannot know for sure. Therefore, it is always worth talking to your healthcare provider to make the best decisions in your care before you implement anything on this podcast. And please use common sense.
Welcome back into the Beyond Pain podcast. I am one of your hosts, Joe Gambino. I'm here with our other host, Joe LaVacca. And today we have a special guest, Taylor Goldberg. She is a chiropractor by trade, and she is now a virtual hypermobility coach. Welcome into the show. We have one question for you, and then I want to give you the floor to tell our listeners a little bit more about who you are, what you do, where they can find you, and all that. But our first question is
what is your favorite bagel to pair with your coffee?
Egg everything bagel with cream cheese and lox, and it has to be from Utopia Bagels.
Obviously, Utopia, not even because of the family affinity, but because they are tried and true, the best bagels in New York City.
Confirmed.
So Utopia Bagels, guys. That's
Yep.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Well, New York City is kind of the world when it comes to bagels,
Exactly.
I think. So
Exactly.
guys, if you're listening, Utopia Bagels, there we go. Everything with lox and cream cheese. That's how Taylor does it. Love it.
we do have a good amount of New York listeners.
Perfect.
All of you
yeah.
New Yorkers, you have a place
There you
to go
go.
now.
Go
for
get
some
a
coffee.
good bagel. It's the best.
Some coffee and bagels. Go get it. And I can attest to it. They do have very good bagels. So
They do.
all right, Taylor, why don't you just let our listeners know a little bit more about your background, your experiences? We can also go into our first question here, where it's kind of, we've all been shaped by our past experiences, injuries that we've had. So while you're explaining who you are a little bit more, tell us a little bit more about a particular either injury or a story around that has kind of shaped, what you do today.
So I'm Taylor. I am a chiropractor by trade, but my story kind of starts in second grade when I was diagnosed with a condition called Hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos Syndrome. I actually didn't know that that's what it was called back then, and diagnostics back then are very different than how they are now. But I did always know that I was different. I was pulled out of class a lot. I had to go to different types of tutors. They were really occupational therapists, but my mom was very, very careful with labeling things, and I'm really, really grateful for that. And that is something that I think more parents should be doing, especially in the EDS space, and we can talk more about that as well. But I was a competitive cheerleader my whole life, and it was the best sport in the world, in my opinion. And I was able to do pretty much everything I ever wanted because of the support I had as a kid. Then I went to college. I no longer had my support systems, and I was admittedly not the healthiest college student, as most of us aren't. And I went to an Orange Theory class and was told I will have my arms amputated if I lift weights the way I was lifting weights, doing a tricep extension, because my shoulders are very, very hypermobile and they do pop in and out of their sockets. And back then they really were doing that a lot. And so from that moment, things changed for me. I stopped lifting weights. I started going to more doctors and more chiropractors and physical therapists that really weren't the best and used a lot of nocebic language, unfortunately. And I didn't know better. I didn't know anything back then. And so that's really where my pain story began. It started in my shoulder, and then it slowly transitioned into my neck. And then by the time I went to chiro school, I had chronic neck pain. I have a labrum tear in my shoulder. Didn't really want to tell anybody in chiro school that I had EDS. Didn't want to be that girl. I now think differently about things, but back then I was pretty insecure about it. And unfortunately, I had a professor adjust my neck. Granted, I was getting my neck adjusted like every day in chiro school, and that should have never happened either. I'm not blaming this one adjustment on everything, but it was very kind of right after that. And after that adjustment, I had a really, really scary neurological symptoms, ended up in the hospital. Luckily, nothing was permanent, no permanent damage, but it was really, really scary. And that's when I learned about upper cervical instability, which is when your first and second vertebra, the ligaments that support that, have laxity in them. And if you don't have the muscular support, or if you have triggers that come on, they can hit your brainstem. And that's when neurological symptoms can arise, which can be really, really scary. And so going through that experience really shaped how I treat now and kind of everything that I do. It's actually how my business started because I posted about it on TikTok, and this was back during COVID and kind of blew up. And that was the first time that I realized other people deal with this condition too. I really did think I was alone. I really did not realize how many people need help with this. And I also didn't realize how many people believed they can't be helped with this condition, which is really, really not true. And so that's kind of the start of my story.
That's pretty amazing. You mentioned so many things there that we touch on in the show. I mean, no CBIC language, improper treatment. A lot of things come back to, it seems, lack of understanding of these conditions. And I know you're going to help us out with that today. And one of the things I sort of like raised my eyebrow on when you said you were diagnosed, but then it kind of started in your shoulder and then into your neck. Is that pretty typical for hypermobility clients to have like localized issues in an area that spread? Because I'm always thinking it's systemic, right? So everything is always affected.
Yeah, so let's get some definitions out of the way. So there's actually 4 types of hypermobility. There's localized hypermobility, which is when it's just in one joint. There's peripheral hypermobility, when it's in your hands and your feet. There's historical hypermobility, which is you were hypermobile in the past, but you no longer are. And then there's generalized joint hypermobility, which is when 5 or more of your joints in your body go past the desired end range or the statistical normal for people. When we're talking about the systemic version of hypermobility, and this is something that I do want to start talking about more, we have to stop using the word hypermobility for everything in the EDS world because it's really making it confusing and it's making it hard for patients to know if there's something that they actually need to worry about versus not. And it's instilling a lot of fear. Hypermobility in itself is not a problem. Asymptomatic hypermobility exists. Simone Biles, all of our lovely gymnast friends that are super bendy without any problems, they don't need to worry about these things. Now, that being said, what we have recently found, the Norris Lab, which is out of South Carolina, they're in the EDS world. They're a great, great research lab. They just came out with a paper that showed going from asymptomatic to symptomatic, we are starting to realize there are some trends that make that happen. And those are viruses like COVID or Epstein-Barr virus, trauma like a car accident, or even emotional trauma. And then we're also finding this postpartum. So if you know that you're super bendy in 5 or more joints, but you don't have any symptoms, you don't need to worry about this stuff. If you then have some of those triggers, though, it's good to be a little extra diligent about your basic needs, making sure that you are treating your mental health accordingly, making sure you're fueling your body appropriately, making sure that you're staying nice and strong and living and meeting physical activity guidelines so that you hopefully don't end up becoming symptomatic. I don't think that answered your original question, but so for your original question, as far as my presentation of shoulder up into neck, I would say yes. And I would say that's common in everybody. Like if you have a shoulder issue that goes untreated or unmanaged, it's probably going to start radiating into your neck or down into your arm or somewhere else, and other problems are going to come about. So I don't know that that's unique to hypermobility, but yes, I would say I definitely see that.
No, it definitely answered the question for sure. And again, it's really interesting to hear you talk about that because so many clients, as you're saying, come in and they just say, I'm hypermobile. I have hypermobility, whether they were actually diagnosed or not. So to have that distinction, I think is really, really important. You mentioned this criteria of 5 joints or more. Does that include hands and feet, or is that a separate category? Because I know you mentioned the difference between peripheral and local and things like that. And for clients listening who maybe have heard this term before because it's so commonly passed around, what the heck is even normal end range versus too much end range?
Yeah. So it does, if we're talking technically, it does include hands and feet. which if you ask anybody who works in this space, the classifications honestly make no sense. And they're based off of things they shouldn't be based off of. They need to be revamped. The EDS Society is supposed to be revamping them in 2026. We're supposed to be getting new criteria very, very soon. But as of right now, unfortunately, we got to work with what we've got, just the way the system is. So by technically, yes, hands and feet would be included. It's also on the Baton scale, half of it is hands and feet, which makes no sense, but we don't need to get into the weeds on that one. And then what was your second question?
What is, like, for people listening, I think people generally feel sometimes like I'm too mobile, I'm hypermobile. And a lot of times this could even be from a spouse because they move better than their spouse or they move better than their friend, right?
Yeah.
So for a person thinking of what is a normal range of motion versus hypermobile or exceeding what you mentioned as like a normal end range, how do they go about defining that, describing that, and making those types of decisions?
Yeah, so there is statistical end ranges that are considered normal for the general population. So if you go past that, then you would be considered hypermobile. For the layperson, if you've ever been told you were double jointed, that really means you were hypermobile. Double jointed is not a real thing. You don't have two joints. It just means that you go past end range. So if you're using your elbow, for example, if your elbow looks like a normal elbow, you're probably not hypermobile. But if it goes backwards and looks arched, same with your knees. If you look like you have like bow and arrow knees, then you have hypermobility in that area.
I want to circle back just a little bit. So on top of that, where with hypermobility, you mentioned fear as like something that's using the term hypermobility, creating fear in people. Is it the term hypermobility? Like, what? I guess my question is like, what's driving that fear? Is it the language that people are using around it, or is it just like the uncertainty of what hypermobility brings to the table?
I think it's a mixture of the uncertainty, but I also really think it's social media. Unfortunately, if you are told, and this is what I'm seeing day in and day out, you go to a physical therapist, you go to a chiropractor, and they're like, oh, you're hypermobile. And they just leave it at that. They don't say anything else. Then they go home and they Google hypermobility, or they go on TikTok, or they go on Reddit, and they're seeing the most extremes. And I get people every day asking me, is my life expectancy shorter because of this? One, I want to ensure everybody know it is not. I get asked daily, am I going to die from this? Like, we cannot just be using this word if that's what they're equating it to. And people have free will on the internet these days, and we know what's on the internet about these conditions. There's so much misinformation. We have to do better than just saying, I think you're hypermobile. Go look into that. That's not good enough, and it's causing a lot of harm. And so musculoskeletal clinicians specifically do have a due diligence to at least say the bare minimum of reassuring them what is actually going on. And if there is something risky that they need to look into because of their perceived hypermobility, and you have to help guide them through that and not just let them go on the internet and figure it out for themselves. It's not fair.
I think that's very valid, and I think our language as practitioners, and we touched on the nocivic language, really matters and can drive a lot of fear for people, and even like a misunderstanding of what's going on. For somebody who, maybe they have a couple of joints they feel like are hypermobile, what are some other ways that somebody could get a better understanding? Okay, maybe I do have hypermobility. And then besides yourself, what are some other resources or places they can go to get some good information?
Yeah, so let's again go back to some definitions. So if you have 5 or more joints that are hypermobile, they go past their end range, and you're experiencing chronic pain, so pain for longer than 3 months, and some form of either dislocations, like your joint fully comes out of socket and you need to go to the hospital for them to put it back in, or a true medical subluxation, not a chiropractic subluxation. So this is when a joint partially comes out of its socket and comes back in on its own. That means that you are in the symptomatic category of generalized joint hypermobility. If you are in that category, that is a good enough reason to get help and to get support. From there are some other things that could be going on. It's not always hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. Just because that's the most common, that doesn't mean that's what you're dealing with. And I do think that we are throwing that around a little bit too much recently. But there are acquired forms of this condition which means you got it from your sport or you got it from a car accident or some form of trauma. And then there's genetic connective tissue disorders. EDS, there's like 15 types of EDS. The one that I'm talking about is hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos Syndrome. It is the most common type. It is now deemed 1 in 500 people. It's probably more than that if we're being realistic, but that's what it's deemed as of right now. And it's the only form that doesn't have a genetic marker currently. And that's the one that you're seeing people, when they're saying hypermobility, they're really referring to HEDS. And again, we need to be using HEDS if that's what you're talking about, because if you have a connective tissue disorder, that is very, very different than being hypermobile. They are not the same thing. Hypermobility is a symptom of a connective tissue disorder. There's a lot of other connective tissue disorders as well. Marfan syndrome, Loeys-Dietz syndrome. There's so many different types, and it's important that you rule those types out. And all of those have genetic markers, so it's a very black and white. You either have those or you don't. Unfortunately, HEDS is not as black and white. It's a clinical diagnosis as of right now. And as I stated before, the clinical criteria kind of sucks, but hopefully that will be changing soon. And as far as resources go, there's a lot of people on social media, which is great. And I'm happy to see that now, because there was a time and a place where I was like begging for more people to talk about this. Now there's also AI in the mix, and we can get into the weeds on that part of the conversation too. But my website, I have a free resource page that has trusted clinicians that I trust. It has a bunch of research articles as well, so that's a good place to go. The EDS Society does have a practitioners list that I do recommend, and I do think that's a good place to start. I have some, I don't want to say issues, but some issues with the EDS Society as a whole, but their practitioners list is really, really great, and that is a really, really great place to start. Yeah, that would be my first starting points.
Well, that's really great. You mentioned how it's important to distinguish between a lot of these connective tissue disorders, and you yourself undergoing probably treatments or practice that weren't as beneficial for you as they could be for other people. So what would be certain things that people with a Ehlers-Danlos or Marfan's should stay away from? Like, what's the biggest difference between Marfan's and Ehlers-Danlos? Because those seem to be, again, I'll put myself in the uneducated general public here on this information because this is really fascinating. Those seem to be the most two that I understood, but I didn't know that there was such a big difference in maybe the way we would approach them. So what would I guess be some things people should definitely avoid? Like, it sounds like these manipulations are potentially one of them. And what would be the biggest difference in finding the difference of Marfan's versus Ehlers-Danlos in terms of how people would approach that treatment?
Yeah, so from a musculoskeletal standpoint, it's not that much different. But from an overall health standpoint, it is. So as musculoskeletal clinicians, it's not our job to differentiate what type of connective tissue disorder, but it is our job to screen and get them and guide them through the process of making sure that they rule out big, bad, and scary. And there are different big, bad, and scaries for Ehlers-Danlos syndrome and all the different types of Ehlers-Danlos syndrome and Marfan's and Loeys-Dietz syndrome, etc. And to be honest, it's very, very rare that you're gonna have somebody as an adult not know that they have Marfan's, Loeys-Dietz, one of those other connective tissue disorders. Those are usually found when you're a kid. So it's not really that big of an issue as far as which type of connective tissue disorder if you're working with adults in the musculoskeletal setting. But if you are an adult in the musculoskeletal setting and you're like, I think I have a connective tissue disorder, the odds are you have HEDS because the others would have been found when you were a kid, most likely. Not all of the time. There's always exceptions to the rules, etc. But very, very rarely do those things get missed in childhood. HEDS gets missed in childhood and adults across the spectrum. And so as far as do's and don'ts, it is contraindicated to do a cervical adjustment, so a neck adjustment, in anybody with a connective tissue disorder. That includes HEDS, all the forms of EDS, all Marfan syndrome. And that's because our vasculature is more fragile, and the risk for big, bad, and scary is higher. We already know there's a non-zero risk for things like stroke and big, bad, and scary things for neck adjustments. We also know the reward of neck adjustments is very similar to the reward of things that do not have that big, bad, and scary risk. And so, in my opinion, it's not worth it. I don't think it's worth it for anybody, but especially if you have a connective tissue disorder. And then, so that's like the no brainer. But I get asked all of the time. So I just want to clarify, when I'm saying neck adjustments, I'm talking about HVLA adjustments, those big cracky ones. I'm not talking about Atlas orthogonal. I'm not talking about an activator. Those are safe. I don't know how beneficial they are. They're safe. And I just need to put that out there because I get asked it way too much. Then as far as other areas of your body, when adjustments go, safety is, you're not, nothing big, bad, and scary. Maybe a rib fracture would be the biggest thing elsewhere. But I think it's important, especially as chiropractors, asking ourselves, like, why are we adjusting? Do they need more range of motion? We know that they're going to get a short-term increase in range of motion from this adjustment. If they're already too mobile, are we helping them, or are we kind of just wasting time and money and maybe even doing a little bit of harm? So I do think that we should be critical about our decisions when it comes to passive modalities in general. But then as far as other don'ts, fluoroquinolone. So if you get a UTI and you're prescribed Cipro, that's the most common one. Those are contraindicated in people with connective tissue disorders. And that's one that I wish more people knew about, because UTIs are really, really common. And I have seen catastrophic events from these medications in this population. And it was just because no one knew to tell them not to take those. And then there's some other general anesthesia. Localized anesthesia might not work as well. So dentists can become really, really traumatizing for this community. I can speak on that for myself as well. And so that's something that I think that we can help people with as well. But from a musculoskeletal standpoint, the biggest one is no neck adjustments, no traction on the neck as well. Traction is contraindicated with connective tissue disorders. So no Y straps. Any form of traction on your neck. Yeah. Did I answer your question?
Yes, it definitely did. I'll just throw this out there just because we're talking about it. What about stretching? Because
Mm.
all of my clients who have lots of range of motion love stretching. They feels good. Does this fall into that bucket just while we're chatting?
Yeah, I love that. I love that question. So let's talk about tightness in general first. So tightness is not good or bad, it's neutral. And when you have ligament laxity, let's use our neck as our example here. I like to describe this as we have two buckets in our body: in our control, out of our control. In our control is our muscles and our nervous system. We can train these can change. Out of our control, our connective tissue. These are the cards you were dealt. You got bad connective tissue, just sucks. Your bones, your alignment, those things are out of our control. Nothing's changing my ligaments unless I'm using a scalpel or some sort of thing that's not FDA approved right now. And so what our body does is it says, you don't have stability in your neck, so I'm going to make your muscles really tight to help you out, because your body just cares that you stay alive. And that's great. But if those muscles don't have the capacity to stay tight, they're going to get fatigued. And then we're left with that bobblehead feeling. So if you have ligament laxity in your neck, your muscles are going to get tight to provide that support for you. And if they don't have the capacity to do that, they might get fatigued, they might get tired, and then we're left with that bobblehead feeling. Can also play a role in our pain loop, in our pain story. And our first thing when we feel tightness as humans is, I need to get rid of it. I need to stretch to get rid of it. What if that's there to protect you? And what if you go and get rid of it and now you're more unstable because of it? That's what we see all of the time. And so when it comes to stretching, there is a time and a place for it. I also don't think stretching has as much impact on tissue change as a lot of people think it does. But if it feels good in the moment, you can use that as a strategy. But if you're overstretching, that's a problem. So we like to put rules around stretching, and we want to make sure that we are stretching safely and not past our end range. And then sport specific, especially gymnastics, dance, cheerleading, overstretching when you're going into a hyperextended position using mats and then loading that stretch, that is extremely, extremely dangerous. It also is not going to do anything for their body positions. It's not necessary, and nobody should be doing overstretching, period. But for the normal lay person, it's fine to stretch, but you should know why you're stretching. You should know when you should be stretching, and you should know how long you should be stretching for. We like to say, don't hold a stretch for longer than a minute. Active stretching, dynamic stretching is always going to be better than passive stretching. But if you have a couple of passive stretches that you really enjoy, go for it. It's not really going to change that much. Just make sure that you're not overdoing it.
Yeah, I like that a lot. And I think for myself, I kind of almost over blanket, let's just not stretch. Let's do more isometrics, end range loading, like just things that are going to help you, again, that other bucket of having more active control over your movement. So it's good to hear you like, hey, if we're doing shorter term stretching, it feels good. And I really like that thought process and approach too.
Yeah,
On on the note from the conversation that was, sorry to cut you off.
you're
You can finish your thought, but go into a little bit more of like what have you seen has been like the most helpful for this population as far as exercise go? Because I do know everyone's first thought is always stretching, as you said. So where should their brain go as far as movement?
Yeah. So, on that note, I was just gonna say that you'll hear me say this a lot. I don't ever say you can never do something, and I'm a firm believer in that because, like, especially in this population, a lot of things get taken away from us, and I don't think that's fair. There's a time and a place that we might not be able to do certain things, but I never like to use the word never in any way, shape, or form. That being said, I will use the word everybody, and everybody should be strength training. And the reason is not for pain management. The reason is not even for overall stability. It helps with those things too, but especially as women, the risk for osteoporosis is more real and also just more known now than ever before. We have the data showing if you lift weights starting as soon as you can, the risk of osteoporosis is so much lower, and the risk of hip fractures when you're 80 years old is so much lower, and that makes your risk of death lower. And so, as musculoskeletal clinicians, we have an obligation to help our patients increase their life and health span. And the number one way to do that is to get people stronger. There is a narrative in this population that you can't get strong. That is not true. But there are some things that I do think everybody should know. One, it is going to take longer for muscle mass changes to happen in this population.
Hmm.
And so expectation setting is really, really important. And you might find that your clients come in and they're like really frustrated because their peers or their spouse saw results within 3 weeks or even 3 months, and they're still not seeing that. One, create smaller goals for this population, think more short term than long term, and celebrate the little wins along the way because it is going to be a longer journey, and that does suck. There is wound healing slowness in this population because of the
Yeah.
connective tissue issues. And that is important for us to be aware of. And then the other thing that's important is that we usually struggle with proprioception, so where your body is in space. And that can lead to when you're working out, this is the most common thing I hear, you don't feel anything, no pain, it's all good, easy. Then you go home and 24 hours later, you're stuck in bed for 3 days or a week because you overdid it, or maybe you went past your end range and your tissue was not able to handle that yet. That's what we see most often. And that usually comes from proprioception issues. So working on proprioception is really, really important for this population. Also tempo and speed, slowing down your movements.
Mm.
We can use our range of motion to cheat. And a lot of people in this population will say, I don't feel it in my muscle. Don't feel that muscle activating. That's probably because they're using their range of motion and cheating the movement. And if they slowed down, that would probably help a lot. So we do very, very slow tempo for our population, and that seems to be a really, really helpful thing when it comes to weightlifting. And then in terms of like end range loading, because I get asked that a lot, there's a time and a place for end range loading, but I always like to ask, like, why are we trying to end range load? Is it for an activity? Is it sport specific? Because if the answer to that is yes, then yes, we need to train. We need to make sure that we can do that. If you're just trying to like live your normal life, you're better off spending time on learning to control your mobility than pushing your mobility. And so it's really goal specific in terms of should we load our full end range versus should we get really good at our daily tasks and our activities of daily living. There's a lot of narratives on that on the internet as well. And unfortunately, I think a lot of people don't realize how severe some people with this syndrome are. And we're talking about people who have been bound for months, maybe a year. And we're going to tell them that they're doing things wrong because they're not fully loading into their squat. I think that's a problem.
Yeah, Taylor, I'm so happy that you were so adamant with that message with strength training. And I hope that that was heard from everyone because I think it is so, so, so important.
Yeah.
I also really appreciate the context of how to strength train because I think that the narrative, as you mentioned, with a lot of big systems out there, it's loading end ranges, it's holding end ranges, it's trying to control every nth of your degree. And a lot of people, like you said, that come in and see us just want to live a happier life, a healthier life. The proprioception thing is really interesting because I would say the more common thing with a lot of the clients that I've worked with on this spectrum is, yeah,
Yep.
finding the muscle and trying to slow things down. And probably due to a lot of narratives from previous providers, they're stuck on that one muscle. They're stuck on like trying to find a glute or trying to find, the shoulder this or the transverse that. And I feel like that does hold some people back. How do you navigate those conversations with your clients when they're really stuck on trying to find that one muscle, that one movement?
Yeah, I see this all of the time as well. I like to have the conversation of we teach all of our clients what proprioception is and also what interoception is. So interoception is what are you feeling inside of your body versus proprioception is where is your body in space. And so when it comes to this conversation of I can't feel that one muscle, I usually don't like to talk about that muscle. I usually like to just show them and let's see, are we actually not able to find that muscle? And sometimes I'll use analogies and give examples like if your glutes were really asleep, you wouldn't be able to stand. So we're able to stand. So our glutes are not asleep, but you're not feeling that muscle in that movement. So let's maybe try some external cues to help us out. So we use external cues a lot in this population. It seems to be a really good starting point to build that proprioception piece. And so we'll use a wall to bring our glutes back in a hinge. And you're going to tap the wall and then you're going to come back so that we know where to stop and where to feel that area. Also, just telling them instead of naming the muscle, because most people don't know anatomy, is you should be feeling it in this area. Oh, you're not feeling it in that area? Let's try it this way. Are you feeling it in that area now? It's a lot of trial and error too. But yeah, I like to just do action instead of talking about why they're not feeling their glutes or their glutes are asleep. I also think there's a time and a place to have the pain science conversations. And I've learned the hard way that we cannot out talk our way into belief. So yeah, I've learned that the hard way many, many times.
Yeah, I think I have too.
I think we all have. I think we all have.
So I think, I mean, I have one more question. I don't know about you, Jill. The clicking, popping, things like that. Those are things that a lot of people complain about. I'm sure more so in the hypermobility world. So how do you educate around that? Have those conversations, and is it a symptom that you really like focus on to improve, or is it something else?
Yeah. So we explain this as every joint in your body has fluid around it. And when there's movement in that fluid, bubbles form and that creates a noise. As a chiropractor, I can tell you there is a lot of studies showing that when you're getting adjustments, the noise that you're hearing, it's called a cavitation, is not actually your bones moving. It's just those bubbles forming in that joint fluid. And that happens when you're mobile. So if you're hypermobile and you're noisier, that just confirms that you're hypermobile. If it is painless, it is nothing you need to worry about. It is not dangerous. It's annoying, and we can talk about that, but it's not dangerous, and I do want you to know that. If it is painful, I want to know about it immediately. That's a completely different story. But painless noises in our
Mm.
body just confirm we have more motion in that area. Now, if you are constantly feeling the need to pop a specific area over and over and over again, that tells me there's probably some instability in that area, and we're going to want to work on creating some strength, stability, and safety around that area. But if you're talking about your knees just being extra noisy every time you walk up and down the stairs, I'm going to tell you to ignore that. And if you really can't ignore it, let's talk through ways and different strategies we can distract ourselves around it because it might be completely out of your control anyways.
Yeah, that's great. I had talked to my daughter about that one because she like constantly loves like turning her neck and popping herself and all that other stuff. And be like, well, you know what? I talked to a very smart person today. So maybe we need to start strengthening a little bit more and dance rather than just keep stretching over and over again. So I'm going to get her on the bandwagon.
Yes, yes.
I think the last thing that I was thinking, and you had touched on it a bit before, that you can have these kind of spectrums of this hypermobility. It can be acquired, it could be genetic, it could be, traumatic, it could be emotional. And obviously just kind of hinting at some of the connective tissues in our bodies and the things that people feel, fear. I know some or a lot have gastrointestinal issues. Some have skin, and you mentioned this before with skin and wound healing. Some have skin issues. So with the broad spectrum of symptoms from hypermobility, and I don't expect us to do a deep dive right now, but how would people know like what to do with different symptoms? Because like you said, movement seems to come down to pretty consistent. Hey, I can help you with strength. I can help you with this. I can help you with that. But how do we educate people to know if and when their GI symptoms are an issue and what to do, or their neurological symptoms are an issue and what to do?
Yeah. So connective tissue lines literally everything in your body. It lines your organs. It's everywhere. And that's why this is a systemic condition. And it is a spectrum disorder, meaning some people are going to have a couple symptoms and some people are going to be really, really severe and have a lot of symptoms. There are very common symptoms that we see in different systems of our body. And that's one of the reasons that I think having a diagnosis can be really valuable, because you're going to have doctors look at those specific, what we call comorbidities, more often if you already have that umbrella label of HEDS. And so some of the most common ones we see is some form of dysautonomia, which is an autonomic nervous system disorder. That's where POTS comes in, if you see that on the internet at all. MCAS, which I don't even think we need to call it MCAS, just angry mast cells. Mast cells live in your connective tissue and they can produce a bunch of different chemicals. Histamine is not the only thing that they produce. They also live in our stomach, and that can be a big, big player in the GI symptoms that we see in this population. And then there's a lot of other musculoskeletal comorbidities like hip dysplasia, upper cervical instability that we need to be aware of for this population as well. And then slow wound healing, easy bruising, skin fragility, scars healing really weirdly. There's a lot of hormonal stuff that we're starting to find out that's connected to this. There's a whole slur of symptoms, if we're being completely honest. So as far as when to get help for these symptoms, that is a priority question. And especially the GI system, when it comes to exercise, we know how important nutrition is. We know how important fueling your body is. And we also know that you're not going to be able to make the strength gains you want if you're not fueling yourself properly. And so asking GI questions in a musculoskeletal setting, I think, is really non-negotiable. And one thing that we do see in this population that I would like for everyone to be aware of is sometimes eating hurts. They'll eat and their stomach will literally hurt. And so they don't eat because of that. Especially in kids, that can be labeled as an eating disorder. And that changes the trajectory of someone's whole life, when in reality it was GI motility issues or some form of abdominal compression syndrome. So don't make assumptions would be my first advice when it comes to the GI system, especially in kids and especially in young women. And then in adults, asking deeper questions. What do you know about your GI system? Was it diagnosed as IBS? IBS to me is a yellow flag. We need to go see a GI specialist. That's a red flag in my world. And then as far as the autonomic nervous system disorders, like the first line of treatment for POTS is nervous system resilience regulation strategies and cardiac rehab. So that is our bread and butter. We need to be knowing how to work with that population. And that condition is going to drastically impact their ability to do their movements. And we need to be aware of that. They might need more supine movements. They might need more seated movements, or they might just need to be paired differently. Like that can be a really easy strategy. I don't think we do enough. Instead of going from sitting to standing in our workout, let's do all of our seated ones first, all of our standing ones second. That's probably going to go a lot better for somebody who has issues going from seated to standing. And yeah, I would say there's a spider diagram that you can find on my website. You can find it on the EDS Society's website that you like color in your symptoms, and that helps paint the picture of the priority of the person in front of you. That's a really good way to start picking the pieces of who do we need on our care team? What do we really need help with? How can I help guide you through this? Because it can be really complex.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that. I mean, and really, we talk about it a lot. I mean, having your network of people, and it just seems so important for this population in particular. So thank you for that reminder. And I hope there were some good takeaways for the people listening.
Yeah.
Mr. Joe, do you have any other questions for our wonderful guest?
I do not.
Taylor, tell us again how people can contact you, find you. This was an amazing conversation. I feel like we barely even scratched the surface. So we can probably come on and do more specialty things like hip dysplasia, cervical instability, all these other different things. So I definitely want to keep that on our radar. But in the meantime, how do people find you and work with you?
Yeah, awesome. So I do have a clinician course. It is CEU approved for 12 CEU credits. You can find that on my website, thehypermobilechiro.com. If you click clinicians, you'll see it there. And then on Instagram, the Hypermobile Chiro, I'm on there quite often every day. And that's the easiest way. And then you can always email me. My DMs are always open. I love talking about this stuff. I could talk about it forever. And then as far as clients, we do one-on-one virtual hypermobility coaching. So anywhere in the world, you do not need a diagnosis to work with us. So if you're suspecting that you're dealing with something like this, we would love to chat. You can find a free discovery call on our website as well. But like I said, you can just DM me. I love to talk about this stuff.
Well, you're very good at it. We really appreciate it. Joe, love you, man. Taylor, we love you. Welcome to the Beyond Pain family. We so appreciate your time. And listeners, thank you for tuning in again. And don't forget to come back next week for another exciting episode